You suffered injury because of a doctor's carelessness, and now you're looking for the right attorney to help you solve your legal problem. Before you actually choose the right attorney for you, I want to ask you a question because I want you to identify which of the following types of injured victims you are before you select the right attorney. You want to know what this is all about? Come join me for a moment as I share with you some great information. Hi, I'm Gerry Oginski. I'm a New York medical malpractice and personal injury attorney. All right, so let's say you believe that your doctor was careless, causing you significant harm and injury. And now you're online searching for an attorney to help you solve your problem. And now you're trying to figure out which lawyer is right for you. But one question I want to ask you is, how do you know that the attorney is going to select you as the right client? It's an interesting twist. It turns it around. Instead of you actually looking to see which lawyer is right for you and deciding which lawyer to hire, I'm now asking you a different question. How do you know that the attorney you are going to select is going to go ahead and say, hey, you're the right client for me? When you go to some of the best attorneys in New York, you are going to find that they are highly selective. They don't just take every case that walks in the door. They don't look at a client and say, hey, you have a good case, therefore I'm going to take you. Instead, they're going to look beyond whether or not you have a valid case. So you have to ask yourself, what type of injured patient are you? Are you an angry patient? Are you an accepting patient? Are you a vengeful patient? Are you a sympathetic patient? Are you an understanding patient? Now, why do I ask you to ask yourself these questions? Because the very best attorneys look at you as an injured patient and they ask themselves, how will this person look? How will this injured patient look to a jury when we are at trial 2 or 3 years down the road? In addition to how you will look towards the jury, the attorney will often ask themselves, they won't ask this out loud, they'll say, hey, can I get along with this injured patient? Because now I'm going to have to live with this person for the next 2 or 3 years. And if there's conflict at the very beginning, that gives the attorney a very good indication that they may not get along with you at all. You might be angry, you might be bitter, you might be vengeful. And you know what? You may have every single right to feel those things. And no one's detracting from that. Nobody's saying you don't have that right. But from an attorney's standpoint, when you come into the office and now the attorney is deciding whether or not to allow you to hire him, one of the things that the best attorneys look for is, hey, can I get along with this injured patient? Is this patient going to have an open mind and be receptive to the legal advice that I'm going to provide? Will this injured patient allow me the opportunity to go ahead and help them through this legal minefield known as litigation? If they're not open, if they're not receptive, if they're not willing to accept my advice, then you know what? I don't care how good a case they have, I'm not going to get involved and participate with this particular client. So now let's take a look at some of the other things that I mentioned that an attorney looks for. Are you an accepting patient? Now, what do I mean by that? Some people turn around and say, you know what? This is God's will. This is fate. Whatever happens, happens, and I accept that. Okay, that's understandable. Some people have that belief and some people accept that. And they say, whatever happens, happens. Can the attorney accept that rationale? And I will tell you that most of them will. Why? Because juries will understand that. They will recognize, hey, they didn't cause this to happen. They didn't contribute to their own injuries. But whatever injuries they are now left with, now it's God's will. And now they have to make their way through their life, through the rest of their life, and deal with it as best they can. And you know what? A jury can understand that. And a jury will recognize that for what it is. All right, what's the next one? An angry patient or a vengeful patient. I will tell you, I've been doing this now more than 29 years. And I have found that those types of patients, even though they may be fully justified to feel that way, tend not to do as well when a case goes all the way to trial. And now a jury has to decide whether or not they are more likely right than wrong that what they are claiming is true. And if so, how much money they are to receive as a result of the doctor's carelessness. Why? It's a psychological thing. The jury looks at this person and they see someone who is miserable, who is not trying to better themselves. And I get it. Listen, I understand that some people may not have the capability or the ability to try and better themselves because of their emotional state, because of their physical well-being. And I understand that. But juries don't always recognize that, and they don't always sympathize with the patient who is angry, who is vengeful, who's doing this to get back at the doctor, to try and make sure this doctor never practices again, which the lawsuit is clearly not designed to do. But once they recognize that there's that edge to this patient, to this injured patient, now they have a different feeling toward them, and they're not necessarily eager, or I should say overly eager, to want to help them with this lawsuit or to help them with the amount of damages that they expect to receive. So what about the sympathetic patient? The sympathetic patient is probably the best type of patient that an attorney can take on. Why? Because now when you ultimately get to trial, the jury sees this person as somebody who had nothing to do with causing or contributing to the injury, like I mentioned earlier, and they recognize that their plight now is so horrible, it's so terrible, and the jury begins to feel sympathy. Now I have to tell you something very important about this particular character trait. During the trial, actually at the end of the trial, the judge gives the jury a legal instruction that says, ladies and gentlemen, sympathy is to play no part whatsoever in your verdict. So now go back to what I said. A sympathetic patient? You're telling me that that may not be the great characteristic for this type of case? I'm going to tell you that there's a bit of irony here. For an attorney who's evaluating whether you, the injured patient, are the right one for him as a client, being sympathetic is a phenomenal characteristic to have. It's a great trait to have. When you ultimately go to your deposition, which is pretrial question and answer session, where the defense lawyer has an opportunity to question you about what happened, now again, if you are sympathetic, you have a much stronger case, because now the defense lawyer realizes that when you get to trial, and now you're sitting in front of the jury, 6 members of the community who don't know you, and you present a sympathetic figure, the jury is much more likely to connect with you and want to give you a verdict in your favor if you are sympathetic, and of course, if the facts support your claim. So how do we take these two seeming contradictions between someone who's sympathetic and the judge's instruction telling the jury, listen, you are not to consider sympathy in your verdict? Well, we don't ask for sympathy. Sympathy is really turning to the jury and say, hey, listen, she feels bad, we feel bad for her, let's give her a handout, let's give her everything that she's asking for. No, that's not the basis for the jury's verdict, and we don't focus on that. But your sympathetic character comes out when you tell the jury what happened, when you express how you deal with it. That is important. But we don't turn to the jury and play on your sympathies. That would be improper. And then the judge's legal instruction comes in, says, hey, don't base your verdict just on sympathy. Oh, we feel bad for this patient. No, no, no. You are to consider whether or not the doctor was careless. If the doctor was careless, yes, now you give a verdict in favor of this patient. Now you go to the second question. Was the doctor's carelessness a cause of this patient's injuries? Yes or no? Again, sympathy doesn't play a part in answering those questions. Now comes time for damages. And now they have to answer the pain and the suffering you endured and how much money you are to receive because of the doctor's carelessness. Again, we're not asking for a handout. We're not asking for sympathy. The patient has plenty of that. Instead, we're asking, based on the facts of this case, to give this patient a full and fair verdict in her favor. So why do I share this great information with you? I share it with you just to give you a real insight into what goes on in these cases here involving medical malpractice cases in New York. You know, I do recognize you're watching this video because you likely have questions or concerns about your own matter. Well, if your matter did happen here in New York and you're considering bringing a lawsuit but haven't done so yet because you still have questions that need to be answered, what I invite you to do is pick up the phone and call me. You know, I answer questions like yours every single day, and I'd love to talk to you. You can reach me at 516-487-8207 or by email at Gerry, Gerry, at Oginski-law.com. That's it for today's video. I'm Gerry Oginski. Have a wonderful day.